In the world of college basketball, certain names transcend the sport itself. One of those names is Geno Auriemma. For decades, he's been more than just a coach at UConn. He's been the architect of a dynasty, a mentor to future WNBA stars, and the face of women's basketball excellence. But what if it all came to an end? What if the emperor of UConn basketball stepped down? Today, on Prime Field, we're diving into the earthquake that would rock women's basketball if Geno Auriemma were to retire from the program he built into a global powerhouse. Stay with us as we unpack the domino effect his departure would trigger, from recruiting nightmares to financial fallout, and why this hypothetical scenario keeps basketball executives awake at night. 11 national championships, 6 perfect seasons, more than 1,000 career wins. These aren't just statistics. They're the foundation of a legacy that transformed women's basketball forever. When Geno Auriemma arrived at UConn in 1985, the women's basketball program was virtually unknown. Today, it's mentioned in the same breath as historically dominant programs like UCLA men's basketball under John Wooden. Imagine walking into the UConn facility after Auriemma's retirement. The trophy cases would still shine. The championship banners would still hang from the rafters. But something essential would be missing. The voice that pushed generations of players to greatness. The strategic mind that outmaneuvered opponents year after year. The charismatic personality that made people who never watched women's basketball tune in just to see UConn play. Leadership isn't about being liked, Auriemma once said. It's about being respected. And respected he is. Even his fiercest rivals acknowledge his genius. Former players describe his coaching style as demanding yet transformative. He doesn't just teach basketball, he reshapes how players understand the game itself. This isn't just about losing a coach, it's about losing an institution. When Nick Saban retired from Alabama football in 2023, the program immediately faced uncertainty despite its enormous resources. Now imagine that scenario with someone who has been even more dominant in their sport. The UConn women's basketball program without Geno Auriemma would be like Apple without Steve Jobs. The foundation would remain strong, but the visionary leadership that made it exceptional would be gone. Picture this. You're the #1 high school basketball prospect in America. You have offers from every major program in the country. For decades, one phone call would stand above the rest, a call from Geno Auriemma. "I want you to be a Husky," he would say. And for countless top recruits, that was all they needed to hear. Diana Taurasi, Sue Bird, Maya Moore, Brianna Stewart, Rebecca Lobo. The pipeline of talent to UConn has been unmatched, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of excellence. The best want to play for the best? But what happens when the magnetic force that attracted all that talent disappears? Suddenly, programs that have lived in UConn's shadow for years would see an opening. Coaches who have lost recruiting battles to Auriemma would be circling like sharks, telling prospects, UConn isn't UConn anymore. The recruiting pitch at UConn would have to transform overnight. No longer could they sell the opportunity to be coached by a legend. They would have to sell... what exactly? Tradition? Other programs have that. Facilities? Many schools have invested heavily to compete. TV exposure? In today's media landscape, that advantage has diminished. The truth is, Auriemma hasn't just been recruiting players to a program, he's been recruiting them to his vision. His ability to look at a high school player and see what they could become under his guidance is unparalleled. "I don't recruit the best players," Auriemma once explained. "I recruit the right players." This philosophy has allowed him to build teams that fit together perfectly, with complementary skills and personalities. Without that vision, UConn could find itself in the unfamiliar position of losing recruiting battles. And in college sports, recruiting isn't just one factor in success. It's the lifeblood of any program. The first class recruited after Auriemma would tell us everything about UConn's future. Would they still attract a 5-star talent? Or would we witness the beginning of a new hierarchy in women's basketball? Walk into a UConn women's basketball practice, and you'll immediately notice something different from most college programs. The intensity, the attention to detail, the refusal to accept anything less than excellence. This is the Auriemma culture. A culture where practices are often harder than games, where championships aren't celebrated for long because there's always another one to win. "We're not collecting rings," Auriemma once said. We're collecting moments. But cultures don't maintain themselves. They require constant reinforcement from the top. When a new coach inevitably takes over, they'll face an impossible choice. Try to maintain Auriemma's culture or establish their own. Maintain his culture, and they risk being seen as a pale imitation. Change it, and they risk losing what made UConn special. Current players would feel this tension most acutely. Many chose UConn specifically for Auriemma's demanding style. They wanted to be pushed to their limits because they knew that's what makes greatness. The new coach would inherit a locker room full of players experiencing something they never expected. A UConn without Geno. Team dynamics would shift. Leadership hierarchies would be disrupted. The psychological impact cannot be overstated. Consider this. Under Auriemma, UConn has famously gone years without losing consecutive games. This isn't just about talent. It's about a mentality that refuses to accept defeat. Can this mentality survive without its architect? Many great programs have fallen into periods of mediocrity after losing legendary coaches. UCLA basketball post John Wooden. Nebraska football after Tom Osborne. The challenge for UConn would be avoiding this fate by preserving what works while allowing a new leader to establish their own voice. Culture is intangible but unmistakable. And at UConn, it's been Auriemma's most powerful creation. College sports are big business, and few women's programs have been as commercially successful as UConn under Auriemma. Sellout crowds, lucrative media rights, merchandise flying off shelves, donor contributions flowing in. All of this has made UConn women's basketball not just successful on the court, but financially viable in a landscape where many women's programs operate at a loss. Auriemma's retirement would put this financial ecosystem at risk. Would casual fans still buy tickets if the team stops dominating? Would donors continue their generous support during a potential rebuilding period? Would TV networks still feature UConn prominently if they're no longer the sport's standard bearer? These aren't just hypothetical questions. They have real implications for UConn's athletic department budget. The women's basketball program has been a rare revenue generator that helps fund other sports. A decline in this revenue stream could create a ripple effect across the entire athletic department. Corporate sponsors who have aligned themselves with UConn's winning tradition might reconsider their partnerships. The value proposition changes when you're no longer associating with the dynasty. All of this creates pressure on whoever succeeds Auriemma. It's not just about wins and losses. It's about maintaining a brand that has become a business unto itself. Few incoming coaches would be prepared for this level of financial responsibility. It's one thing to design an offense or develop players. It's another to be the face of a multi-million-dollar enterprise. The athletic director would have to make a crucial calculation. Is it better to hire someone from within, who understands the UConn machine but might lack Auriemma's star power, or bring in an established name who could maintain public interest but might disrupt the program's continuity? Either way, the financial stakes of this decision would be enormous, extending far beyond the basketball court. Geno Auriemma isn't just UConn's coach. He's been women's basketball's most visible ambassador for decades. Love him or hate him, you can't ignore him. His outspoken nature, charismatic personality, and undeniable success have made him the face of the sport to many casual fans. His retirement wouldn't just create a void at UConn, it would create a power vacuum in women's basketball itself. Who becomes the sport's most powerful voice? Who steps into the role of challenging the establishment when needed? Who pushes the sport forward by demanding more coverage, more resources, more respect? For years, Auriemma has been willing to say what others wouldn't, to call out inequities, to demand excellence, not just from his players, but from the entire ecosystem of women's basketball. His influence extends far beyond games and practices. He's shaped how media covers the sport, how administrators value it, and how the public perceives it. With Auriemma gone, other coaches would vie to fill this vacuum. Dawn Staley at South Carolina, Kim Mulkey at LSU. Muffet McGraw, though retired from coaching, remains influential in the sport. But none combine Auriemma's longevity, success, and willingness to be controversially outspoken when necessary. This transition would come at a pivotal time for women's basketball. The sport is seeing unprecedented growth in viewership and interest. WNBA ratings are up. College games are drawing record crowds. Would this momentum continue without one of its driving forces? Or would progress slow without Auriemma consistently pushing for more? The ripple effects would extend to the professional level as well. University of Connecticut has produced more WNBA players than any other program. Auriemma's retirement could potentially disrupt this pipeline, changing the composition of the professional league over time. Everyone in women's basketball knows that the sport is at an inflection point. Auriemma's retirement would either accelerate changes already in motion or create new, unexpected turns in the road ahead. When a legend steps away, they leave behind both a legacy and a void. For UConn and women's basketball, Geno Auriemma's hypothetical retirement would create seismic changes we've tried to examine today, from recruiting challenges to cultural shifts, financial implications, to power dynamics within the sport itself. The dynasty he built might continue. Great institutions often find ways to reinvent themselves, but it would inevitably be different. Perhaps most importantly, his departure would mark the end of an era, a golden age of dominance that future generations would study and marvel at. One thing is certain, whoever eventually replaces Geno Auriemma won't just be filling a coaching position. They'll be stepping into the shadow of a giant who forever changed what was possible in women's basketball. The question isn't whether UConn could survive without Geno Auriemma. The question is whether UConn, and women's basketball as a whole, would ever be the same. For Prime Field, this has been The Legacy at Risk. What happens if UConn's basketball emperor steps down? If you found this analysis valuable, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shape sports. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our uploads. Until next time, this is Prime Field, where we don't just cover the game, we uncover what the game truly means.